In July 1942, the Arctic Sea was locked in perpetual mist. The sun lingered above the horizon without warmth, its light diffused through a veil of fog and ice crystals. Within that emptiness drifted the broken remains of a convoy. The ships of PQ-17, once a proud formation of Allied supply vessels, now lay scattered across hundreds of miles of frozen sea. What had begun as a carefully assembled lifeline to the Soviet front had dissolved into chaos and silence. In seas cold enough to kill in minutes, one ship refused to vanish quietly. The rescue ship Zamalek, a converted passenger vessel, had been designed to recover men from sinking ships. Her decks were reinforced for ice, her holds fitted with infirmary bunks, and her crew trained in cold water recovery. When the order came for PQ-17 to scatter on 4 July 1942, the Zamalek turned eastward instead of retreating. Her captain, John Daly, later wrote that he could not bring himself to abandon men still alive in the fog. Around him, the Barents Sea rolled with oil, debris, and the remains of burning ships. Visibility rarely exceeded 2 cables. The crew stood watch in silence, listening for cries through the muffled air. The convoy had sailed from Hafjörður, Iceland, on 27 June 1942. 35 merchant ships carried thousands of tons of tanks, ammunition, and aircraft destined for the Soviet Union. They were guarded by cruisers and destroyers under Rear Admiral Hamilton. Yet the Arctic route was always a gamble. German aircraft flew from bases along the Norwegian coast, and U-boats prowled the approaches to Murmansk. When intelligence reports claimed that the battleship Tirpitz had left its fjord anchorage, the Admiralty feared an ambush that could annihilate the convoy. The signal to scatter, sent at 21:36 on 4 July, was meant to save what could be saved. Instead, it exposed every ship to destruction. As vessels turned from formation into isolation, the Arctic became a hunting ground. Luftwaffe torpedo bombers flew in from Banach and Kirkenes, striking at single targets without warning. U-boats surfaced at night to finish the work. Ships that tried to hug the ice edge found themselves trapped. The destroyer escorts, low on fuel, were ordered westward. What remained was a slow-motion disaster carried out in temperatures just above freezing. In the words of one survivor, the sea was full of ships dying alone. Within that chaos, the Zamalek and a handful of small escorts refused to abandon the field. They began searching in concentric patterns, their radar screens blank from interference. On 7 July, at 3:30 in the morning, a lookout reported faint knocking against the hull. A man was found clinging to a section of lifeboat, striking it with a wrench to attract attention. He was stoker William Reed of HMS Leamington, barely conscious, his fingers blackened by frostbite. The crew hauled him aboard with a line, cutting away his clothing before hypothermia could claim him. He was one of 7 from his ship to live. By midday, 32 men had been pulled from lifeboats and rafts. Most were beyond speech, their faces burned by salt and ice. The medical officer recorded body temperatures below 30 degrees. Artificial warmth was applied gradually, as too much heat too soon could stop the heart. The surgeon's notes, later entered into the Admiralty file, read, "Frostbite extensive, morale impaired but discipline intact." The men who could speak described explosions, strafing runs, and the moment their ships slipped beneath the ice-streaked water. That evening, the rescue ship rendezvoused with the trawler Lord Middleton, another small vessel ignoring orders to withdraw. Together they continued the search through a sea thick with drifting wreckage. Smoke still rose in patches from the fuel of the sunk freighter Honemu. The smell of oil clung to the fog. Every few hours they found a new cluster of debris, an overturned raft, a floating oar, or a lifebelt without an owner. Even in such hopeless work, routine persisted. The deck log was filled, the engines maintained, the watch rotations observed. The Arctic demanded precision as the price of survival. To the west, survivors from the merchantman Troubadour had reached the ice coast of Novaya Zemlya. Their ship had run aground and frozen in place. Using lifeboat tarpaulins as tents, they melted snow for water and signaled aircraft with mirrors. After several days, a Soviet radio station intercepted their signals. The Admiralty ordered a small relief group to investigate. The Zamalek was chosen for the task, joined by the trawler Ayrshire and a Norwegian escort. They carried medical stores, hot food, and enough fuel for one attempt. Captain Daly's report described the approach: visibility nil, ice closing, engines at dead slow, proceeding under reduced steam. The fog provided both concealment and threat. The German Air Force continued patrols, and to be caught in open water would mean annihilation. Yet on 10 July, as the mist thinned, lookouts sighted flares rising from the coast. When the Zamalek closed to within half a mile, they saw men standing on the ice waving improvised flags. The ship anchored as close as depth allowed. Rescue parties crossed the floes with ropes, sleds and stretchers. 79 men were brought aboard over 12 hours. Many had lost toes or fingers to frostbite. One died during transfer, his name later added to the ship's roll. The convoy's failure cast a long shadow over Allied operations. Out of 35 merchantmen, only 11 reached Soviet ports. Over 150 seamen were lost to the sea. The Admiralty's public communiqué called the action a grave setback to supply lines in the Northern Theatre. But within internal memoranda, a more complex picture emerged. A coded signal from the Admiralty to Zamalek on 12 July read simply, "Your conduct and that of your ship's company has been noted with admiration." No formal decoration followed. The men of the rescue ships returned to routine duty, their work considered part of the service. The Arctic convoys continued despite the losses. In September, PQ-18 sailed under revised procedures. It carried 40 merchant ships and a stronger escort, including escort carriers that provided limited air cover. Lessons drawn from the Ghost convoy guided its organization. Dedicated rescue ships now sailed with every formation. Convoy discipline was enforced even under threat. Of the PQ-18 ships, 27 reached Archangel, and the doctrine of constant rescue was established as policy. For the men who had survived PQ-17, the experience marked a lifetime. Chief Engineer Thomas Hunt later wrote in a letter preserved by the Imperial War Museum, "When we went into the boats, I believed we were already dead. I remember the silence more than the explosions. When they found us, I thought I was dreaming." His letter contained no anger, only a quiet record of endurance. Another survivor recalled being handed a mug of tea so hot it brought him to tears, though he could no longer feel his hands. Their language remained restrained, the tone of men trained not to dramatize their suffering. The environment itself was the deadliest adversary. Water temperatures averaged -1 degree Celsius. A man immersed without insulation lost consciousness in under 5 minutes. Wind chill on exposed skin could cause frostbite in 10. Navigational charts of the period showed constant drift, making radio fixes unreliable. The Zamalek's navigator described steering by dead reckoning alone, using ice pressure ridges as landmarks. In such conditions, even survival was an act of seamanship. When the Zamalek returned to Scapa Flow in late July, she carried 112 rescued personnel. Her hull bore scars from ice and shrapnel, her deck slick with frost despite the summer calendar. The ship's records show that 83 of those rescued later returned to service in other convoys. The remainder were hospitalized or discharged. Among them were men from 6 different nations: British, American, Norwegian, Soviet, and Dutch. The Arctic had blurred distinctions of flag and language. Survival alone was the measure of kinship. For decades, the events of that week remained largely omitted from public history. Official focus rested on the strategic failure of PQ-17, rather than the quiet heroism of its aftermath. It was not until the 1970s, when wartime archives were opened, that researchers uncovered the rescue logs. The names of the ships reappeared in naval journals, accompanied by understated commendations. Historian Nicholas Monserrat, himself an Arctic veteran, described their work as the steady half of courage, the persistence that happens out of sight. His phrase entered naval lore as a tribute to those who saved lives in silence. In later years, the men who served in the Arctic convoys gathered occasionally at reunions in Hull, Glasgow, and Portsmouth. Their ranks thinned each decade, but the memories retained precision. They spoke of frost forming on eyebrows, of compasses freezing solid, of engines laboring under ice. The bond between them was less of sentiment than of shared ordeal. One described the sound of ice against steel as the heartbeat of the Arctic. On the 50th anniversary of PQ-17, a wreath-laying ceremony was held at Greenwich. A surviving crewman from the Zamalek stood before a photograph of his ship and saluted. The memorial plaque bore the simple inscription, "For those who did not vanish quietly." It was a fitting line for a story that existed in the margins of official reports, yet defined the endurance of the convoys. Today, the wrecks of PQ-17 rest beneath the polar sea, preserved by the cold that once took their crews. Oil drums and aircraft parts still lie visible on the seabed near Novaya Zemlya. Occasionally, divers from scientific expeditions report finding a nameplate or a fragment of cargo. Each discovery reawakens a fragment of that frozen history, the story of men who kept faith amid ruin. The Arctic convoys would deliver more than 4 million tons of material to the Soviet front before the war's end. Each voyage carried the memory of PQ-17 within its discipline. Every rescue craft that sailed thereafter bore equipment and procedures shaped by those first hard lessons. The loss had not been in vain. It had taught the price of hesitation and the value of persistence. In the quiet waters north of Murmansk, where daylight lingers through the summer night, the memory endures. The fog still drifts as it did in 1942, softening the horizon into nothingness. Somewhere beneath that surface lie the remains of ships that never completed their journey. Yet the story of the Zamalek and her crew stands apart, a reminder that even when orders fail and plans collapse, duty can survive through individual resolve. The forgotten rescue of the Ghost convoy was not a tale of victory, but of steadfast humanity. It proved that courage need not roar to be real, nor triumph to be remembered. In seas cold enough to kill in minutes, one ship refused to vanish quietly. If you value these quiet moments of history, your support helps preserve them until our next account from the war years.